the summer, so that's made it a lot harder. And we're sort of trying to figure out how to deal with that, and thinking of putting in an irrigation pond because the rain has been a lot. You get a lot at once versus all throughout the summers.
We've experienced similar things. With one year, we had a terrible drought, and in 2020, everything was really dry. We were pretty well able to deal with that because we do have irrigation, and so we managed to do okay with that. Plus our farm is in a low area and our soil's pretty wet anyway. But last year, when we had so much rain, the river overflowed and everything got flooded. We lost all of our pumpkins. I'd say like 95% of our pumpkins were lost, and some of our corn was lost because of the wet weather. So it's just a challenge. And fortunately, it seems like if one thing's bad, something else is good. So it works out, maybe because we have a pretty diverse.
What about the storm? The tornado?
The tornado. That, I'm hoping that's a once in a lifetime thing, but you never know. When I get a little ding on my phone and it says severe weather, I'm really pretty nervous now.
Did all of you see the damage of it was pretty catastrophic.
Yeah, the whole thing happened in about 45 seconds, and someone from the weather service came out to the farm and they said our tornado was an EF0. So when you see the ones that are like an EF5, I just can't even imagine what that would be like. Just having that much damage in such a short time, less than a minute, and
So with climate change, for us, it's been basically a ride the last 40 years that I've been managing it. We've been talking about it with Extension, has been part and parcel to this. My IPM people that we deal with, which is Integral Pest Management, we get bugs coming in with the storms, and they're more intense and you have to deal with them. So we've been trying to be a little proactive on this stuff, and we've done things over the years to try to counter what's going on. We choose different varieties of corn. We look at the seasons differently. What we used to be the last time we would harvest sweet corn would be Labor Day. We're now harvesting sweet corn the second week of October. We no longer plow fields anymore. We do minimal tillage or zone tillage for our crops. We try to use cover crops as basically on everything, and now we're currently double cropping because we have longer seasons. So we're trying to take advantage of this climate change in any port in a storm that you can make an improvement or get an advantage from it. Kind of counteracts the disadvantages to it. And these swings that you get with a wet and dry year at the same time, they're challenging, but we try to hedge our bet by diversifying, by trying to do whatever you can do with the new technologies that come out and use all the tools in the tool chest. So we try to keep well read on what's going on around the country, and we try to use as much information and help from wherever we can. And there are government agencies that can help us out, and there's individuals that have done a lot of this stuff around the country, and that's it's a never-ending process to get ahead of the storm. It really is.
I just want to ask you a question about the government, because I was really struck as I did this background research for this about the role that the federal government had played in promoting agribusiness, and not at all friendly to small farms.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that.
Oh, okay, well, good. I'm glad to hear that, actually.
Well, first off, what's a small farm?
Yeah.
The definition is different for different organizations and different people. There's a very good SARA program, Sustainable Agriculture Research Initiative, that really is very, they try to work with organic farms, small farms. There's different organizations geared towards different types
Within the
of,
federal government.
yes, but they're geared towards different aspects of, or different types of farming. So, we've been very good about going after different funding sources to try to do some of the out-of-the-box things that we've done on our farm. And I would venture to say that it's just a matter of, you gotta open up all the doors, and you gotta look. There are people out there in the government that are there to try to help. And I just don't think that there's good, bad, or indifferent. Larger farms are gonna get bigger amounts of money because they're doing bigger projects, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other funding sources to help smaller farms. I don't know, what do you guys think?
That's true. I agree with you that there are a lot of opportunities for help from, like Chris and I do a lot, we take classes a lot in the winter time, and actually we appreciate COVID because we can do Zoom classes instead of having to drive to Vernon to attend a class, and that's very helpful. And at those you learn about other funding opportunities for projects, or you can talk to another farmer, which sometimes is much of a help as anything to learn
Actually,
something.
I think that's one of the biggest helps is just networking and dealing with neighbors.
Right. Even today, when I talked to Teresa, I learned a lot in about 15 minutes.
Yeah. We actually found out about a energy efficient grant through the state of Connecticut that we got grant money to update our one of our greenhouses as well as our maple syrup production. So the reason we can adapt that vacuum system that my dad was talking about was actually some of that was paid for, or the equipment to process all of that extra sap. Some of that was paid through a grant from the state. So we were able to get a reverse osmosis machine, which makes it a higher concentration of sugar. It goes through membranes. And so you have a higher concentration of sugar, so that means you have to boil less. And so we were able to triple our production with using the same amount of wood. So we were able to get a new evaporator, which used blowers, so you were able to more efficiently boil the sap and have less emissions. So that was really helpful because we were able to really up our production and at the same time have something that's going to mitigate climate change because we're producing less carbon and adapt to it at the same time. So there are things out there, but like Matt said it, or both of you said it, having that connection between the farmers, we wouldn't have known about it if we hadn't talked to our neighbors. So there are things out there. I think it's hard to say black and white, it's hard to say black and white about an issue as complex as the food system, the whole U.S. food system. Yeah.
So we had a very interesting thing, speaking about farmers getting together. So this was back in 1997, so that's quite a while ago, that we had 3 large farms in the valley, the 2 jack ears on either side of us and ourselves, as well as 7 other dairy farms that used to be in the area that are no longer. But back then, we actually never really talked to each other. I mean, we're neighbors, we see each other going down the road and wave, but we never talked to each other. And one day we had the selectmen of town asked us to come to their meeting with how they had the 20 towns come together. I forgot what they call that organization. COG. So they were looking for funding for the towns, but he asked us to come as farmers to see what can we do in Canaan to encourage farmers to stay here. And so we started, it was Jack here and us that went, Peter, Jack here and myself, and we thought about one of our biggest problems is manure. We got neighbors that don't particularly like the odor, and we want to spread it on our fields environmentally so it doesn't go into the rivers, and we want to do a good job with it, and that's one of our biggest expenses. And, you know, how we handle the manure is a problem, and maybe the town could help us. Well, after, it just took maybe 6-8 months or whatever, we actually put together a manure co-op, of all things, where we got together, we talked about manure. I mean, what else would you do on a Monday at noon? Right? So we're sitting around, and we actually got ourselves a grant from the Department of Ag to put together a nonprofit organization, and we call it Cana Valley Agricultural Co-op. And we invite our government agencies, NRCS and the Department of Ag, and our Congresswoman at that time was Nancy Johnson, and the EPA representative from the region. Anyhow, we got all these people together, and lo and behold, the next thing you know, we're getting a $250,000 grant to do some work on a couple of the farms, and we started to act as a cooperative to do things like put in methane digesters or separators or lagoons, holding lagoons, so we can put it on at the right time of year. Mapping, we mapped the whole valley so that we knew what soils there were, what crops were going to grow on it, how much manure we could put on it, and do the environmentally correct thing. So we just took an idea, and as a group of farmers getting together and starting to talk to each other, we blossomed into this organization. We meet every year, and we talk about what we're doing on our farms, and it's been a very, very useful organization. And it's just a matter of communication.
Say for me, and maybe the audience, other people will be interested too. I'm interested in what is the most ecologically careful way of handling manure.
It's different on everybody's farm. So, you know, what we want to do is we want to make sure it doesn't go into the drinking water. That's number one. So you don't want to have it going, you know, you don't want to spread on frozen fields and see it in a spring when the snow melts and you see, you know, water,
Slurry.
dirty water going into the rivers. And we've really done a very good job of stopping to do that. Way back in the 1970s, we've done all kinds of different things with cover crops and keeping away from the rivers. We have a 100-foot zone that we stay away. We incorporate the manure so that it's not just spread on top. So there's all kinds of best management practices that we use, and all of the farms that are currently dairy farms especially, but animal agriculture, do have nutrient management plans that we work with Natural Resource Conservation Service on and the DEEP, and we put together a plan of action to reduce the amount of environmental impact we have. And every farm does it differently. In my case, I did the cow pots where, you know, I'm exporting nutrients in the shape that my neighbors like, right? So they're willing to pay me for it. Other people...
Does everybody know what the cow pots are?
So we make a biodegradable planting container from manure fibers. We take the manure, we digest it, which is, we basically run it through a artificial stomach. We built a stomach of a cow out of a concrete tank, and we bring it up to the body temperature of that cow, and we continue the digestion process. That's why we call it a methane digester. But we don't let the methane escape. We capture it and we burn it in a furnace. And we use that energy to do different things on our farm. The domestic hot water, heating the offices, that sort of thing. So that's what we do on our farm, but my next door neighbor separates the solids and he makes a compost and he sells it at his gravel bank. Other farmers actually are a deficit area. They don't have enough manure for their cropland. So they store it and then they apply it at the right time of year. So there's different things for different farms. It really depends on where you are, your soil types, there's so many things involved. And the government, Natural Resource Conservation Service, helps us and advises us on the best route to go.
The one thing I would like to also add is that if you hear in the discourse a lot about like cow farts, it's generally because of methane. So methane is a greenhouse gas that is 25% more potent than carbon dioxide. So that's why there's a lot of focus. Sometimes in the environmental sphere you can kind of vilify dairy farms, but that's neither here or there. But that's why there's a big focus on manure and generally just how many ruminants you have because of the release of methane, because it's so potent. And so that's why things like harnessing it with a methane digester and the other things that they're doing are really important. And like it's also economical because you are either producing energy or you are also, you know, using the manure in the best possible way. So
And we are working on, there's been, I've been involved with World Wildlife Organization, and they are working with algae and coming up with feed products that actually reduce methane production in cows. So there's a lot of work being done, and it's coming actually to the market. So.
How about opening to you guys? You've been very quiet. Do you have some questions, some thoughts? Yes.
I just have an observation. All three of you have land that was from family. I think a big part of Connecticut, and especially Northwest Connecticut, you can't start a farm from scratch. The land is so expensive. So there's a lot of complex factors here. You guys are still struggling. You're finding ways to get grants and so forth to make a variety of products, but the underlying land is being sold pretty quickly right now for other things. And there are some startup farms like Arafusa. I mean, that's quite a startup farm down in Litchfield there. It's a little different category. And I'm a forester. I've worked for a new farm in northwest corner that he's gonna have dairy farm. And you know that's pretty unusual. So it's a lot of complex factors. NRCS getting grants to do innovative things, that's wonderful. And communicating between farmers, that's great too. I work with loggers, and all loggers are independent, and they don't talk to each other. Similar thing too, because they're working all the time, and you guys are working all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a comment.
Well, my brother loves me, I think, but he didn't give me that farm. So, you know, we have a mortgage. So, you know, I mean, it's just part of when you're in any business, you have to make an investment and pay it off. Hopefully you're able to make your payments every month and, you know, have some left over when you're done. But it's, even though it was in our family, even my dad was not the type of person to just be like, sure, here you go. He tried to keep everything fair among siblings, and he sold people things, he didn't give it, so.
yeah, and I think another thing that is interesting that there is some pressure on small farms, but also 2020 was our most profitable year ever because there were more people here because of COVID. So while my sister was in the ER having to deal with people with COVID, we were getting a bunch of online orders. Like for the first time ever, we had to keep track of that. So that was an interesting mixed bag. Obviously, you know, the cons outweigh the benefits, but there is a strong market here. We do really well at the farmers markets, but there is some economic viability in restaurants and stuff like that. So we are in a good place where generally the land is so expensive, but there are people that have some disposable income that they were willing to pay. And it's interesting to go to the grocery stores and be like, because you know, going at the farmer's market, you have all the prices memorized. And it's like, this isn't really that much more expensive. It's more the hassle of having to, versus getting everything, you have to go to multiple places. So yeah.
And
There's also just one thing on the land that there are different organizations that are working on trying to get land available for young farmers. And there's, the Berkshire Taconic has a program. There's some land trusts in different towns that have programs. And it's not easy. It's very expensive to get land nowadays, but there are tracts of land that are sitting fallow that people would like to see into agriculture, and it's, I think we have to do more to get those lands available, and we have to invest in these land trusts to try to make that happen. But I think people are starting to see the light, and it is a very big issue.
There were two people, actually three, Marge, and didn't you have, with the red sweater? Yeah.
Well, one of the comments I wanted to add on is that when we talk about the value of the land, is that the initial part of Freund's farm, the 200 acres, but when the next plot of land, the next 200 acres that was next to what we already own, it was contiguous acres, and that land came up for sale, but the cost of that land was a high enough where, like, for the value for farmland, it wasn't, you couldn't afford it at that value. So farmland preservation comes along, and then you sell the developmental rights to that property, and so then we are paying agricultural values for that land. So the landowner that's selling us the property gets, the full value of what that land is worth.
And
But
that
we're-
preservation program is actually in Massachusetts as well as New York, so it's different names, but those are the type of programs that are out there.
So when my grandfather helped my dad start the farm, they have it all in conservation, and it's not with the trust, it's actually with, pretty sure, the state of Connecticut. So we get a tax break. It's all, there's like a special designation of this land, and it has to stay in agriculture. So even if my siblings and I don't continue the farm, which I don't think is really likely, I don't think we're gonna sell it, but even next generation, if they sell it, you're not allowed to develop on that land. The only thing that can be built are temporary, like, agricultural buildings, like a greenhouse. So that's another thing, that it made the land more affordable, because there is an incentive to keep it in agriculture.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, I
There are
was
some
wondering.
things in the chat.
Oh, someone had mentioned earlier that distribution is a big issue for small farmers, and I was curious, like, what is the mix of markets to which you bring your products? How much of it is restaurants versus obviously retail for Paley's, but and are there pros and cons that small farmers think about when you're choosing where to market?
I think it depends on what you're marketing, and I mean, in my case, Cowpots is international, so those markets, I have to go through distribution, and sometimes two-step distribution. It's actually a pretty complicated situation for me, but it's unique. As far as my wife's business goes, we built a parking lot, so we don't really want to go to the markets.
Whenever anybody asks us if we would like to participate in their farmers market, and I'm like, I really appreciate you wanting me to be there, but I already pay taxes on a parking lot. And so, like, I don't have the time to go to another farmers market.
Right.
I mean, back when I was back in the 90s, I did. I mean, I remember packing up my kids as well as my vegetables and going into town. But now we have a parking lot where they come to us. They'll go to the farmers market in Norfolk, and whatever they've run out of, they come down and finish shopping at our place.
But every operation is a little different. I mean, the dairies, they usually market all of their stuff through their co-ops, because in the old days, people used to come to your farm and you'd give them a can of milk and you get $2 or whatever. But we don't do that anymore. Everything is picked up by a big silver truck and off it goes. You guys,
Yeah, we do. We sell pretty much everything we grow at the farm, and occasionally, we have a few restaurants that will come buy some things from us, or JM buys tomatoes, and different places do that. And if we have an excess, we might give a few people a call. But mostly 2020 we sold everything we grew. We didn't have to throw away a lot of stuff. So,
And we work together, I think, some
Yeah.
farms, you know, if we have extra tomatoes or they have extra corn, and we try to communicate where we can, and it helps a little bit.
yeah, that's,
Yeah,
we
we
buy,
love to get Freund's early season tomatoes.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing.
and we
It's
go,
a
we
beautiful
buy a
thing.
lot from other regional farms, things that we don't necessarily grow on our farm. We get from some organic farms, some traditional growing farms, and that's a big help to us.
And one of the comments from an IPM extension educator that we dealt with many years ago, he said that, you know, when you have too many crops and you're doing small projects all the way through, you're not going to make money at them all.
Right.
So what you need to do is you focus on what you're good at, because not, you know, like we can't grow a decent pepper for our life, but we grow great sweet corn and tomatoes. So it's one of those things where, yeah, you throw the pepper plants out there, but you're not going to have a harvest enough to make it worth your while. So, you know, it's like why we have chickens in the parking lot.
Yeah.
It's more entertainment value for the customers. You know, we're definitely not, you know, we're not getting rich off of 60 chickens that are producing, you know, a couple dozen eggs. So
We kind of don't subscribe to that model. We have, when people ask like, oh, what do you grow? I'm like, pretty much everything. So, you know, the big ticket items are also corn and tomatoes, but also a lot of greens, peppers. Even we'll do some things like bok choy, and some herbs. My one interesting value added thing that my mom started making pesto and salad dressing. The salad dressing was with our maple syrup. It's so good. But where we sell is the Kent and Cornwall farmers markets, and then some restaurants, and then it's the interesting distribution is with the maple syrup because you can sort of we actually sell down to the southern part of the state because that's worth it because, you know, it's a higher value item, so you can make more money, you know, bringing a dozen peppers 2 hours away doesn't really make a lot of sense, but a dozen quarts of maple syrup, that makes a difference. So an interesting thing about distribution was we tried to get into like Whole Foods and other things in the southern part of the state, and they were like, oh, we have to talk. There was all of these like layers that we just couldn't get through. So it's the like independent grocery stores in the southern part of the state, but I mean also around here that we sell our maple syrup.
You know, you didn't mention that you also have a CSA.
That was in my, I forgot. I was thinking of that. And yeah, so we do have a CSA. That was also very popular in 2020. Last year was also good, but it was like a record. So we actually, because of COVID, we started delivering to our neighbors. We have like a North Cornwall route, so because we didn't want too many people in our sugar house where we distribute it, and so yeah, that's good.
Marge, I think we'll take one or two more questions and then we need to bring this to a
I
close.
should make it quick. Back to the methane digesters. How widespread is the use of that? You hear about the so-called mega farms, and I've been reading lately when people are trying to figure out what to do about the environment. There've been articles in magazines and newspapers that says, stop eating beef and dairy, which is ridiculous. If you
Yeah,
can-
we're kind of opposed to that
Yeah.
philosophy.
How widespread is the use
So
of
the
these
digesters there's a lot of information around the country, around the world. And Europe has embraced that technology much more than we have here. We're probably 10 years behind them. Part of the problem is different areas of the country have different economics. So, for instance, in New Mexico, you really need 10,000 animals to go into a digester to make it efficient. It really depends on what the cost of electricity is, and whether or not you're actually making electricity or you're making renewable natural gas. So it really is, it's a very complicated issue, unfortunately, and they're very expensive. But what's going on is that we have found a way to take the food waste that we're having such a problem with in this country, and every town has the same problem of how we're dealing with our organic waste and what it's costing us with, what's going on in Hartford with that recycling plant and the cost of that. We can actually take those organics and run them through our digesters at a profit and actually do it for virtually nothing compared to what the municipalities are paying now to get rid of it. So the technology has a lot of merit. It's going to take some help by our lawmakers to help us get through the permitting process, and the cost of putting these things together has to be supplemented some way or another, whether it be by a tipping fee that it doesn't have to be as expensive as the recycling, but it has to be something so that we can take care of the maintenance and the building of these projects. Currently in the state of Connecticut, there are 3 going in that are all going to be going directly into the pipeline for renewable natural gas. They're going to be, one of them is working with Cough, which is the chicken farm on the other side of the state that has a terrific problem with chicken manure. And they're going to be working on some technologies to remove the phosphorus and try to really clean up their act. There's another one that's going to be in the center of the state, and they're selling milk, bottled milk and all this. They have, I think, currently 2,000 animals on a rotary farm, on a rotary milking center. A really, really interesting operation that was not very environmentally good, but this digester has encouraged them to really pick themselves up by the bootstrap. So it's really doing a good job, even though it's a big farm. It's actually it's a family-run farm, just a lot of family members. And then we have a third one that is a 300-cow dairy that is bringing in a lot of food waste that was going into the recycling plant that they're taking at a reduced cost to the towns. So it's a win-win-win situation. So they're coming online. People are starting to look at them. And we're working very hard with the EPA and our local DEP to try to make it a little more easy to have them come together.
I'll try to be quick about it, but I kind of have a funny story about that. I was interviewing farmers about these very similar issues for my senior thesis, and I was actually interviewing a dairy farmer who was right up the hill from my college, and we were having a great conversation, and then we started talking about methane and stuff like that, and he's like, okay, so Rebecca, can you get this college to pay for my methane digester? Like, come on, we need to get this going. I will take all your food waste. I will make your campus more sustainable. And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm just like this. And then we talked about it for a while, and I was like, I can't say that the school is going to pay for it, but like, I love this idea. And he's like, you're BSing me. And I was like, no, I really want this to happen. He was like, yeah, all right. But I did bring it, and hopefully, I mean, I don't really know now, but it just, that shows like the biggest barrier to implementing this was the cost. He was like, I really want to do it. I just, like, can we make a partnership here? Because, hey, this college, you have a lot of money. Like, come on, help me out here. So.
You need to get the government to help fund it.
Well, you don't have to go to government. You can go to the industry. We have Specialty Minerals in the town of Canaan, which is the lime facility.
Right.
They're very interested in renewable natural gas because they use a lot of propane currently to do their drying for the wire and other products that they're making. So we're in discussions with them between the Jackier Farm and ourselves and Specialty Minerals of trying to put a system together. But this is so preliminary. I mean, it's going to be years, but we're starting.
That's exciting. Thank you.
I'm getting a signal that I have to call this an end, but I'm very sad to call into it. And I want to thank you very, very much for coming. I feel actually really energized by this conversation. And I thank you, the three of you, very, very much, and I'm sure we all do.